Hello everyone, welcome to the video on writing summaries. So I wanted to provide this video after you have developed your first round of summaries for the They Say, I Say text. So as you completed the summary for the first section, you would have encountered a section actually on summary and the importance of them as they relate to developing essays. So I want to talk about them on a general level, and then I want to talk about their significance as they relate to developing a more thorough essays such as research essays and argumentative research essays and why they are so important. So first, I just want to talk about developing summaries in general and demonstrate how these will get applied to a reading. So what I'm going to do is review some strategies that you'll use to actually help you get to the point of writing your summary, and then show you how that is done in an actual passage. So I will walk you through that process. And then finally, with developing the summaries as it relates to what's important and what to include, and then a brief snippet about how that is important when it comes to your actual writing in a research paper or academic essay. So first, part of writing a summary really relates to reading strategies. So if you've ever taken a reading strategies course or a course that relates to how to enhance your reading skills, it's really important to kind of take those elements and use them as you are in the process of developing your summary. So first, we have underline important information and write keywords in the margin. This is sort of an annotation. If you've done annotations before, then you'll kind of understand what that means. But ultimately, we have to be able to identify what the key information that is being conveyed by the author and underline that information so that we can ensure that we include what's the most important bits within that passage and then be able to write that in our summary. So first, then what you can do to do this, of course, underlining, some people like to highlight, other people will write those keywords in the margins, or they use a sort of note-taking system as well. So you can have a separate document that will help you get started. Then you'll want to identify how those concepts kind of relate to what you already know. In other words, you will maybe potentially have to kind of understand why those things are important, and then of course give any examples or details. So as you recall from your writing sample, the passage that you all had to write a response to or an essay to, we're going to go ahead and revisit this and look at it from writing a summary perspective. So some of the key reading strategies, as I indicated before, is to highlight some of the most important information. So I'm going to walk you through this passage as if I were to read it and then walk you through how you would develop writing the summary for this, okay? So first, our first line says, advertisements are the most prevalent and toxic of the mental pollutants, okay? So right away, we kind of get a sense of what this passage is going to be about, right? So first, we have this idea of advertisement. So this is a key concept here, which means that the entire passage is going to focus on or make commentary about or argue or whatever, it depends. And we'll learn that based off of what is said after this. But ultimately, advertisements is the key concept. Here they say are, right? And when we look at verbs like this, they will generally tell us what they're going to do in the passage. So if they're saying are or is, it usually means, like in math, an equal sign. And they're telling you what they think about advertisements. So advertisements equal, according to the author, the most prevalent and toxic of the mental pollutants, okay? So right away, we got our thesis statement or what their argument is, okay? So what I would do, I would, of course, the key word here being advertisements. This is my subject or topic, if you will. And then my verb is an equal sign. So I know that it's going to be an argument of sorts. And then my position, or excuse me, the author's position, which is prevalent and toxic of the mental pollutants. So we have two key descriptions here of specifically of what. We ask the question of what and mental pollutants. So we're talking about aspects of mental psychology, things like that. So right away, we have a sense of what the argument is, and in some aspect, you'll need to include what this is about, or in a sense, in other words, or using your other words to describe this, right? So in summaries, you don't want to, or you want to at least try to avoid, writing word for word or using quotations or direct quotations. You need to be able to do this in your own words. This is important because when a reader reads your summaries, it lets us know whether you actually understand the passage or not. So for instance, if somebody were to say advertisements, if somebody, were writing a summary that says advertisements, according to the author, are problematic, right? Well, it doesn't really tell us too much, right? Yes, it can tell us they're problematic, but it doesn't explain why. And that's something that we'll need to include, but also specifically what type, right? In the sense of in what ways, so that they're arguing that advertisements are most prevalent, which means that they are around a lot or everywhere, and then also the key word being toxic, which tells us it's not just a problem, but it's more than that, more than a problem, that it actually causes harm. So you'll want to be mindful of the word choices that you are using, so that way you're conveying what the author is trying to convey in the best possible way. Okay, so then they move on to from the moment your alarm sounds in the morning to the wee hours of late night TV, commercial pollution floods your brain at the rate of about 3,000 marketing messages per day. So they're giving us an example, right, of what they mean by prevalent. So they're telling us from the morning to the night on TV, more specifically, that we're seeing what they mean by prevalent. And then they give a statistic or an example or information. So every day, an estimated 12 billion displays ads. So what they're trying to do again is provide evidence or proof of this being prevalent. Okay, we haven't talked about the toxic part yet. We haven't talked about why it's harmful yet. All they have done so far is just show us what they mean by prevalent. Okay. So then they continue, the increase in commercial advertising has happened so steadily and relentlessly that we haven't quite woken up to the absurdity of it all. So now they're beginning to lead into the potential concept, or at least they should, regarding it being toxic. So they say no longer are ads confined to the usual places. Anywhere your eyes can possibly come to rest is now a place that in corporate America's view can and ought to be filled with a logo. So right here, we know that this first section is about its prevalence and how they see that, right? Remember that this is the author's argument. This is what they mean by prevalent, okay? In the next section, they talk about you fill your car with gas and there's an ad on the nozzle. You wait for your bank machine to spit out money. You drive through the countryside and the view of the wheat fields is broken. Your kids watch Pepsi and Snicker ads in the classroom. A company called Video Cart installs interactive screens. There is nowhere to run. No one is exempt and no one will be spared. In the silent moments of my life, I often used to hear Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So what we actually see in this small passage are examples, right? So they take this first section and talk about its prevalent, and then they continue with more examples of what they mean. Now, what they haven't done, right, yet is talk about the toxicity or anything like that. So if I were writing simply a summary on what I have here, I can only speak to its, being prevalent or everywhere in society by talking about what they mean by that here in the first part, and then the second part only focusing on examples. Okay, so I can't put in my own words, I can't put in my own ideas about the toxic part of it because they didn't get to it yet. Naturally, I would assume, because this would be a much longer article, that they probably eventually get to it. But what we're reading right now, okay, doesn't address it. So if I were simply writing a summary about this section, I can only speak to this first part of it. Okay. So knowing that, then I would then move on to writing my summary. So now that I understand the reading and I've gone through it just for comprehension purposes and identifying all the important parts and actually what's happening in the passage, I can go ahead and begin to write my summary. Now, I brought up here a potential template that you can use. You don't have to all the time, just really depends on the purpose for writing the summary. In the example for the They Say, I Say text, you all are simply just writing standalone summaries, not necessarily summaries for any research essays or academic essays or anything like that. But for the purpose of this example, we'll just go ahead and follow along. So here we have now we need to identify the type of text this is. So we already know that this is a passage. It indicates to us that it is a passage. So we can say in the passage. And now we want to introduce the title of the text. Okay. And here we have the title, which is called Hype. And it's included in a much larger text, but we don't need to include that in this instance. We can just say in the passage Hype. And then we could cite, of course, at the end where it comes from. And since it's an article or a passage, we are going to use quotations and not italics. If we were going to use the name Signs of Life as it is indicated down below, then we would use italics. But in this instance, we are going to simply use the quotation marks because it is an article. So in the passage Hype, and then we are going to get the author's name. Callie Olson. And then we are going to now use our academic verbs. So we go down here, okay? And if we look at these verbs, and I already talked about how the word are and is sort of an equal sign, which already lets us know it's argumentative sorts, okay? So we don't necessarily want to say, even though in the much larger passage it's going to be argumentative, but for the sake of these two passages here, we can say presents, argues, or argues against, whatever it is. But in this instance, because they make it really clear advertisements are the most prevalent and toxic of the mental pollutants, they are making an argument of sorts. Okay, so you can say argues, contends, or some version of that. I provided a list of strong verbs in Canvas that you can find, but in this instance we have asserts, argues, you can say claims, maintains, declares, whatever it might be. I'm just going to say asserts. Okay. And then as we go from there, we want the main argument. And so this is where we need to take this sentence and make it into our own. Now we will use the keyword advertisements because this is a key word that we have to include. So we would say advertisements are, and we can use the verb there. And as I said before, are the most, in this instance, prevalent. So we can find another word for prevalent. I would use the word ubiquitous or some version of that. That just means that it's everywhere. And so I will include that. And so we can find another word for toxic if we want to. Word hippo, just so you can see how that works. And I'm going to write in the word toxic and see what I can find. So characterized by behavior that will negatively impact others. And that's kind of what we're aiming for here, and not in any other really specific way. So we can say malicious, hurtful, we can say unstable, that would be good, or we can say troubled. So those might be fitting for the tone or the essence of this passage. So I'm actually going to say troubling of And then, so they use the mental pollutants, but we don't necessarily want to say it in that way because it's very specific. But if you can't find another way to use it, and I'll just show you an example, you can use it by quoting it this way. Okay. So that way we know those are their specific words. There's nothing wrong with using quotes. You just don't want to overfill your summary with it. But because they're describing it in a specific way and you don't want to do a disservice to that description, then you can do that if you wish. Okay. So as we go from there, then we know that we want to continue the summary by including the main points, of course, and then any examples or points that they bring up to support, their claims. So let's go ahead and focus on that here for a moment. So then I mentioned before that they go ahead and talk about different examples and they explain. So I can say, so this kind of gives us a sense of what they said next. And then we can continue. I'll use the author's last name just to change it up. Lassen presents statistics. And we don't need to say what those are unless we're going to use it later. Okay, so now I've covered this part where they talk about the statistics of each day. Then we go on, the increase in commercial advertising has happened so steadily that we haven't quite woken up to the absurdity of it all. So we can say, so I'm going to use the word claims, as you can see here, because they create that claim and then they're going to support it with what their evidence is here, which is via examples. So the author claims that people have not realized just how much okay, say oops, excuse me. And then I will do, for example, she presents actually I'm going to say highlights. So here I didn't use any of their own words or anything like that, but I captured pretty much the essence of what was happening specifically in this passage. So we have in the passage hype, Callie Lassen asserts advertisements are the most ubiquitous and troubling of mental pollutants. The author presents examples detailing how advertisements are presented to people from the time they wake up in the morning to the time they go to sleep at night. Lassen presents statistics that support her points regarding how many ads are displayed in any given day. The author claims that people have not realized just how much advertisements have increased over time and the extent to which people are exposed to these advertisements. In the remainder of the passage, Lassen provides detailed examples of ways in which advertisements are placed in society. For example, she highlights, and this is again another key verb here, how ads are located at gas stations, classrooms, and supermarket carts. So I pulled those directly from here. And then ultimately, the author argues that there is no place where advertisements are not located. Okay. So this is kind of what you're going to want to do. You'll notice that we didn't include every single possible thing, but this summary presents exactly what is suggested and highlighted in the passage that we have in front of us. So you'll want to do that with the they say, I say textbook, but also to speak to the necessary requirement of kind of having to summarize passages in research, and you'll get more of this in English 102, but ultimately I need to know as a reader that you understand what other people's arguments are. So the whole concept of they say, right? You need to demonstrate that you understand it clearly, and in the only way for me to verify that is through the summaries that you provide. So when you write research writing and you present, let's say hypothetically you were going to argue against some article or an author or something like that, you need to present what they say first. And this is how you would do that, okay? So if we did it in a way that doesn't clearly capture this passage, you lose credibility as an author, and then that already kind of weakens your essay to begin with. And sometimes that just happens right at the summary, even before you get into the argument, okay? So go ahead and you want to practice that. You can review this video if you need to, or use the documents that you see here and that I provided in the passage, or excuse me, in the assignment description. If you have any more questions about writing summaries, please let me or the tutor know.